Hello and welcome everybody to our third online Storytime webinar. I am Phoebe Weston-Evans, overseeing the online Storytime programme. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, whom I acknowledge as the traditional custodians of this land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people present at today's session. It'd be really nice to know where you're all joining from, so do use the chat to let us know and acknowledge the traditional lands you're calling in from. This session is being signed thanks to Kerry and Della. It is also being recorded, so I'll send out a link to the recording after the session. I invite people to pin their either Della or Kerry's video throughout the session. And you can do that with the three little buttons, three little dots in a button in the top right corner of their videos and pressing pin. There's a Q&A function available, so you can post your questions to the panelists throughout the session and we'll endeavour to get to them at the end. Once again, we are very honoured to have ALIA President Vicki Edmunds here to host the session today. Vicki chose the very important theme of diversity for her presidential tenure, and she is a true champion of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So handing over to you, Vicki. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Phoebe. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on various Aboriginal lands. I'm on the Darragan Gundungurra lands. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present while recognising the strength, capacity and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in our various regions. I'd like to also acknowledge the work of Indigenous library staff who help create collections which better represent our First Nations and make our libraries culturally safe places. I thank you everyone for joining us today for another online Storytime webinar. This one focusing on creating online story times with Auslan interpretation for deaf members of our communities and their families. The inclusion of The inclusion of Auslan in an online Storytime environment is very important to me personally as the ALIA President and my diversity theme. But I want to take this opportunity to point out that by having Auslan interpretation alongside online story times, research has shown that for deaf children, this inclusion increases their opportunities in a natural way to expand peer networks, increase social circles, and overall social resilience. There has been a lot of interest from public libraries participating in the program in this webinar, which gives us hope that we are going to see more and more Auslan's online story times in the future. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by a number of people who are going to share their stories and experiences of their journeys, learning about how to provide the best Auslan story times for their communities. We have Annette Webb, Programs Team Leader at City of Sydney Libraries. City of Sydney Auslan online story times have been hugely popular, with other library services linking those seeking Auslan resources directly to their site. Annette will be joined by Kate Matara-Vula, who is part of the Deaf Society, and who Annette has been working with to develop their Auslan story times. They have also worked with Genevieve Roberts from the Deaf Society, who is joining us in the audience. From the City of Salisbury Libraries, we are joined by Kathryn Brady, who is their Community Learning Coordinator. City of Salisbury have created 3 Auslan online story times so far, which have been very popular, 2 with over 20,000 views. Kathryn has been working with Kate Alchin and Cheryl Wilhelm from Deaf Can Do to create their Auslan story times, and we'll hear about the collaborative process and thinking they went through on their journey. So first of all, we're going to hear from the team at the City of Sydney. So over to you, Annette, Kate and Genevieve.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us. I'm just going to start sharing my screen and hopefully this works for everybody. Has everybody seen our title slide there? Auslan in English Storytime. Okay, thanks Vicki for that, and thanks Phoebe for organising today's event. My name's Annette, I work for the City of Sydney, and I'm joining you today from Wongal country. And we're going to talk, Kate and I are going to talk you through our Auslan and English Storytime journey. Next slide. So we do have for many years done a range of Auslan programming across a lot of our City of Sydney library and cultural programs. We've done lots of adult sort of lunchtime talks, author talks, late night libraries. Increasingly over the last 2 years, we've done lots of online webinars. We've also done some Auslan focused event. This is a photograph from our Auslan Slam, which we had as a live event in 2019. Kate was one of the key performers of that night. This is a photo of Kate with a couple of other performers. So we've done a fair bit in the Auslan space for adults, and we wanted to extend that to children's programming. So I'm just going to hand over to Kate, who's going to talk to you about the literacy needs of deaf children and children who are hard of hearing. So I guess by way of introducing that part of our presentation, the literacy aspect of Auslan programming for children was quite different, or is quite different, from adding Auslan interpreting to an event. So I'll hand over to Kate, who'll talk us through the things that need to be considered in that space. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you very much. So we did have to think about the literacy needs for deaf and hard of hearing children. There is plenty of research regarding hearing children and their literacy needs. However, there's very limited number of resources for deaf and hard of hearing children. So what we do have, it shows that their needs are hugely varied, and there are a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is that Auslan isn't a written language. So, I mean, we do have a way to write it for linguistic reasons, for research. So we do have written English, of course, and we know that the literacy develops for children who can see and can speak. They can actually see the word and they can speak and make that connection. However, it's just not the same for Auslan. There is no written equivalent. So we need to make that connection with the language from the speech and the text. We need to make that link between the two. So if your first language is Auslan, or you have difficulty hearing English and actually acquiring English, then that will in fact impact on your development of literacy skills. The third reason is that 90% of deaf children are actually born to hearing parents. So the hearing parents, most of the time, don't know Auslan. So, and if they do choose to learn Auslan, then they're learning at the same time as their child. So that then means that some deaf children partly acquire Auslan, and that can then be very difficult to learn a second language such as English. So there are a few things that we need to consider about in our approach. So how do we manage those challenges? So we decided to actually have a native proficient Auslan user, preferably someone who is a bit of a bibliophile, someone who loves books and likes performing. So that way the deaf person would be at the centre of the storytelling, so the audience can focus on them. And there's a model there, there's a deaf role model. So the deaf person then helps make that connection between the Auslan and the English. So we try to do that in a number of ways. So we have Auslan and English happening in parallel. We also can show that with strong face-to-face delivery. So the person is delivering the language. Then we also try to link the strong personal face-to-face delivery with the text as well. So we have a number of ways that we try to do that, to connect the Auslan with the English. So at the start, I think it was 2017 actually, it was International Day of Disabilities. So we thought, let's give this a go. So, and we've certainly learned a lot since So the way that we have delivered it has changed over time. So the first time I was the deaf storyteller, I was sitting at the front, and it was, oh wow, I look really young there. Gosh, anyway, I'm just looking at myself. So anyway, I was sitting at the front, and the librarian was sitting next to me, and the librarian was actually reading, voicing out the story, and I was signing in parallel simultaneously. However, the librarian didn't know Auslan, so it was very difficult for them to know, in fact, where I was up to. And obviously I can't hear the librarian. So for us to actually sync our delivery was a little bit of a challenge. So there was a little bit of a timing issue, a little bit of latency. So, or sometimes the other way, they were jumping ahead. So, and the kids, of course, were looking at the librarian. Naturally, hearing children will look to see where the noise, the voice is coming from. So we have to then, just to show you, okay, so then we realised there was a bit of an issue. So the next time we tried at Surrey Hills in the library there, and that was a weekday. So there was myself sitting at the front, and we had the librarian sitting next to me, and the librarian they would actually hold the book and they would be the page turner. So, and then we had an interpreter present at the time, and they were standing at the back of the room while I was sitting at the front, and the children at the floor looking at me. However, the interpreter was standing behind the children. So again, we had a little bit of a confused audience, because they would naturally turn to see who's speaking. So they were listening to the interpreter's voice and would turn to look at the interpreter standing at the back of the room. So, and the other issue that we had is that the interpreter was unable to actually see the text on the book. So that actually affected my Auslan as well, because the interpreter was voicing from my Auslan. So that meant that they weren't in fact using the exact same words that was the written English text. So, and we realised that many deaf and hard of hearing children also have to attend a lot of early intervention appointments during the week. So it certainly wasn't a great time that we chose having a weekday, and that specific library also was not easy for parking. So it was hard for people to actually physically get there, timing and geographically. So then we thought we might try Lidcombe Library. So, and we thought we'll do that in the morning. Car parking was a lot easier as well. So at the time I was the storyteller, and I was sitting at the front of the room, and the interpreter this time was actually sitting in the audience. So, and also, or at the side, so that way they could also see the book as well. So people were looking at the book, they were looking at myself, and also that way the interpreter was able to more closely represent the English in the book while also actually interpreting from my signing. So, and I think that allows a stronger connection between the two languages. And also our strategies we did develop and change over time, and just to learn how to actually make sure that we can really connect the two and improve the literacy. So I'm sure you're all aware that there are many children's books actually rely on a lot of rhythm and rhyme throughout the story. So we need to remember that Auslan is not English in sign. It is not the same grammatical structure. So many of the signs you can't, like, you know, you can hear a word and you can hear how it sounds, but some things just do not translate well into Auslan. Like the grammar of Auslan is different to English. So sometimes it's impossible to have an exact word match with a sign. So we actually are looking for semantic equivalence, and sometimes that is there between just one particular word and one sign, but sometimes it's not. So that situation, sometimes you might have one word in English, but you might need many signs to represent the same concept, and sometimes it's the other way around. So the storyteller needs to pick maybe 5 keywords that we need to think, okay, we need to find a sign that actually does convey that semantic equivalence. So we'll have the word and the sign, and particularly if those words, there is a little bit of a motif throughout the book where those words or signs keep coming up. And that way we would encourage the audience to also sign along with us, or maybe we would question the audience about a specific word and sign. Once the story had finished, we would actually have a word list, and we would then go through that list of words, and of course showing the sign at the same time. So there was also another opportunity for people to ask questions as well. So we could encourage people to sign, we would repeat the signing. So that was another way of building that connection between the English and the Auslan two languages. The other important thing was the selection of books. So the librarian would actually make the initial selection, maybe 10 books. So there may be a specific theme we were focusing on. And then the deaf storyteller, like myself, for example, I would have a look through the book, and some of them were very easy to translate into Auslan. Sometimes it was really difficult and they just did not translate well at all. So we needed to be careful with that selection, and we might end up with 3 or 4 out of that original selection of 10. So sometimes the books were somewhat too wordy. Sometimes it was a little bit hard to make sense of. Sometimes literally the jokes would get lost in translation. So we needed to ensure that the deaf storyteller was working with the librarian to make sure we had a good selection of books. So, and also the interpreter needed to be part of that preparation and working together just to make sure that the interpreter was also on the same page as the deaf storyteller and also librarian, so that we knew when we were going through those key 5 words that the interpreter was in fact using the correct English word. So it was a bit of an organic process, and it certainly did change over time. So thank you very much. I will now hand over to Annette to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, it was, as Kate explained, it was quite a journey, and we arrived at the format that Kate described. I think we've been running that format in face-to-face. Sorry, excuse me. We've been running that face-to-face format since 2018, 2019, we've been running that. But of course, everything changed in 2020 when COVID happened and all of our branches were closed. So we were actually in a really fortunate position in that we'd had, City of Sydney had this ongoing partnership with Deaf Services for several years, and Deaf Services have, because so much of their communication is in Auslan to their members, they have a green screen studio that they use frequently for all kinds of communications. And so we were able to go and take some photos in our empty library branch and use that as our background for our online story time. So this is all filmed on green screen, and so far nobody's commented that the tree over the storyteller's shoulder has not moved in the last 2 years. We tried to replicate what we do in our face-to-face story times online. So Kate described having the words in English on an easel behind the presenter, so that we make that connection between the Auslan sign for a particular featured word and the English word for it. So we tried to replicate that in our online story times by having the featured sign and English words supered at the bottom of the screen. And then we also, when we post them online, we post them on our What's On portal, which is the City of Sydney online portal that people can access. We also have a YouTube channel, and when we post them, we feature the presenter's name in the post, so that when we do return to face-to-face, and anybody coming to our sessions will recognise those presenters and be really excited to see them. And we've also, part of what Deaf Services do when they produce the video production of them is that they superimpose the book in the background, so that there is that constant reference and connection to text and English text. So we're supporting that English literacy development. So some of the, this is a little snap from our YouTube channel. We have a playlist of our Auslan Storytimes on our YouTube channel, as well as our What's On site. We've had such great feedback from all over Australia for our Auslan videos, and there's a program that Deaf Services run called Auslan in the Home, and this has been a really great support for that, for families who possibly are learning Auslan altogether to support their child. And we've had feedback from teachers of the deaf and individual families and other libraries. We're about to deliver, I think this week, we're about to take delivery of our 60th video, which is really exciting. And we're having some great viewership. And we have one program coordinator who kind of works with deaf services to coordinate production and publication of all those videos. And we are like everybody we're in the process of returning to face-to-face story times, and we're actually we've decided we'd like to continue the online element even when we're back fully face-to-face, because it has had such a great impact, and we know people really are getting a lot out of it. So when we do return, we'll be running probably, we're trying to mirror the frequency. So we used to run these story times weekly. So for the last 2 years, we've been dropping a new story time each week, except in school holidays. And when we return to face-to-face, we'll be supplementing our face-to-face sessions with online story times, so that there'll always be something fresh each week. And this last slide is just a little bit of a word cloud of the feedback that we've received from different people over the last 2 years. And it's really wonderful to know that these story times are landing so well and people are using them and enjoying them as much as we enjoy putting them together. And that's it from us. So I'll stop sharing and hand back to Vicki, I think.
Yes, thank you, Annette. That is amazing. I wanted to hear more. Your photos were fantastic. I'm not going to take up too much time because I know that we've got a tight schedule. So I am going to hand over straight away to Kathryn and her team.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen as well, and hopefully this will work. I've got Kat and also Cheryl with me from Deaf Can Do today. So let's see if this works. And I'm hoping everyone, when I start the show, can see this one. So my name's Kathryn, as I said before, and I'm actually the Community Learning Coordinator at the City of Salisbury. My role looks at library programs as well as community programs within our community centres as well. So we, as I said, there's myself, Cheryl, and also Kat from Deaf Can Do, and we're all pinned there. So hello, ladies. We worked on 3 videos together, and we're very early in our process with making these. So it's a very different process, I suppose, and very different way of working. So we just wanted to show what it's like from the foundation and starting the partnership, and also how we actually developed these 3 stories. So this is Kate. So she was our performer for the day, and we were able to work with Kat and Deaf Can Do to work with Kate to make sure that there was lots of background information that was shared before she was even able to come. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So how we originally started thinking about our online story time is slightly a little bit different and slightly skewed, I suppose, considering working with lots of different people. City of Salisbury is very, very multicultural, and we have a strong link with our intercultural strategy with council. So in our research, we were obviously doing a lot of multicultural story times and multicultural online work, and working with a lot of interpreters with other languages. And once we started looking into that a little bit more, we realised that we needed to do subtitles, and we need to make it a lot more inclusive, not just because of other language other than English, but also other disabilities and things as well, with barriers to being part of these online story times. That's when we really worked hard with our internal people at council to talk about our online story times and how we can make those better and more inclusive. And we realised one thing that is missing is obviously the Auslan interpreters there, and we really wanted to work with people within our community to be able to best serve those for everybody. That's when we reached out to Deaf Can Do. So originally we reached out to Kat specifically to really to connect with an interpreter. So our idea was that we would read our stories, the librarians would read the stories, and we would almost have a different screen where an interpreter, similar to this session here, would be an interpreter would be there left a screen to be able to capture that information, to be able to share to our deaf and hard of hearing community. That's when Kat came in and was able to work with us to let us know that there's lots of other ways that we could be doing this, to being able to showcase it. And Cheryl will now be able to talk us through a little bit more.
Cheryl's just let me know that she's having some camera difficulties.
Oh, is she? Oh, no problem. Is she there? Oh, there you go. Are you okay, Cheryl? Or should we? You're all good? No problems. Well, what we might do is just go over to Cheryl and you can actually speak about us working together and how we worked in the preparation and then the filming process as well. And then I'll tap back to continue the presentation.
Della, you need to unmute.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. Thank you to Kathryn for inviting me here today. I will tell you our story is very similar to what Kate was telling you previously, how we started, how we linked up with Deaf Can Do. We were called at Deaf Can Do and we asked if we could have a hearing interpreter to come and do the storytelling. And so we put that on hold and we sort of, had that discussion and we thought, well, maybe it might be better to have a deaf person. And we were asked, why would that be, warranted? And I'm sure Kate explained that in her presentation. It's better to have a deaf person because it's very different than having an interpreter, because the deaf person is so used to being able to adjust their communication strategies with the audience. And also too, they bring in the facial expression, the body language, and it's also, it's like just example with Book Week, you talk about, the sprinklers. Deaf people will go, oh, you need to have the sprinklers. And then, so, whose? And so the deaf person will introduce the sign with the facial expression, the body language, that actually gives that intent on what the story is about. And so to create that visual aspect of the story. And that's why it's very important to negotiate that and to talk with deaf people and to have the appropriate book and the appropriate title. You could say that, we want to be talking about hearing aids, but we really don't need to do that. We need to generalise it so that it's exposed to all the audience. So we wanted to make sure that deaf people could be included and at various levels of hearing loss. If you're telling a story about, the hungry caterpillar, you want to make sure that the intent is there for everybody, not just the person who has the disability. So we prepared the story's translation, we brought in, we had rehearsals, we needed to think about the video. And so Kate, I know, has explained all that to you, but I'm just wondering, Kat, would you like to add anything here at this point in time?
As Cheryl was signing just earlier, so Cheryl was really integral and Kate as well, so deaf interpreters were really integral in being able to match that language. And also, for example, the words, for example, the story title, No Baths Week. So that was one of the stories that was given to us by Kathryn. So that one had a lot of sound words. So like whoosh, I think it was like squelch and things like that. And one of them, for example, was, the whoosh of the sprinkler. Well, you can't translate that from English. So, and as Cheryl was signing, that was obviously something that I, as the sort of facilitator in between, was trying to explain to Kathryn via some phone calls and things like that. So, Yeah, and a lot of it was, you know, us as Deaf Can Do and Kathryn from City of Salisbury just having a real three-way conversation. So, you know, starting the conversation with, we think this, and then, you know, discussing with people like Cheryl, Kate, and our other Deaf and Auslan consultants at Deaf Can Do, just to say, what's the most appropriate way to do this? And what's the best practice here that we can advise and, you know, pass on that advice as our experienced Deaf and Auslan consultants, so that Kathryn had the best practice that we could give Salisbury. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ladies. So pretty much what I'll just go back to this one. You'll see there, Kate is the blonde lady there, and we also had Deb there helping. So as part of the partnership, we were able to spend 3 hours with these ladies and were able to come up with 3 videos. The reason why it was so quick to film was because of the background stuff that we sent earlier to Deaf Can Do and all of the communication. So Kate was able to receive, firstly, we spoke in length about which titles we were going to use. But then we also sent all the individual text as well. So then we could see whether the content was appropriate and talking about the words for signing, but also the interpreter and the performer would be able to know what's coming. Nothing was a surprise when everybody walked through that door, which I think was really important. Just for those who are new to online storytelling, we actually just use an iPad for filming, and we also use the iPad to scan the pictures within the book as well. We used a lapel microphone for our interpreter. Obviously, Kate didn't need one on the day, but what we wanted to do is with our editing process, we wanted to make sure that us as we didn't understand Auslan, we wanted to make sure that we were getting the words and the representation right. So Deb was able to use the lapel microphone. So we had that conversation that was caught on camera. Even in the bloopers and everything, we captured everything. So that way we could be really clear on communication. A few times, Kate stopped and was able to talk directly with Deb, but we were able to then understand that that's where we needed to stop for editing. If we didn't have that, we may not have understood that that wouldn't be part of the story. And then it was just really clear, and we were able to use that in the editing process. We spoke about titles just previously. Kat and Cheryl mentioned them. We actually sent quite a few to Kat and the gang down at Deaf Can Do, and some of them came back that they just weren't appropriate. There's a fantastic story about, I think Evie is all ears on the listing. We thought it would be a good fit. It's all about hearing aid and bionic ears. And we found out through communication with Deaf Can Do about the generalisation, and that, you know, that we wanted to make it inclusive for everybody, and those types of things. We're really open to hearing those feedback. And I think that's really important, is not going into these types of partnerships when you're not the specialist, going in there with an open mind, saying, this is what we're thinking, here's the choices, how can you guys help us, rather than going with a perceived perception and an outcome to start with. We're not the specialists. The deaf consultants and people at Deaf Can Do really were able to help us guide through those. So as I said, we sent multiple titles, and we ended up coming back with 3 good ones as well. So they're the ones that are filmed, and I do have those links at the end of our presentation. Did you want to add anything else to that, Kat? I think you mentioned it before, but
I'm fine unless Cheryl wants to add anything there.
Yeah, Cheryl, did you want to add anything extra?
No, I just hope that we see more of the same.
I've just got a little video here. So this is the reading of the story, and I wanted to be able to capture what Cheryl was talking about with how the expression and the tone of the book and the inflation of the story and the excitement is captured. You can see it's very different how we filmed this to how we would film our regular story times, and it's changed the way that we're able to film all of our story times now because of this experience. You'll see here that Kate is standing in a wider area, and we film from pretty much the waist up and in a wider area, so that way the hand movements and the performance can be captured. We found that the books that we chose were very excitable. So we wanted to make sure that all of the big movements were captured here. And I'll just show you a snippet of Kate. So something like that wouldn't be captured as best we could in a chair. And as soon as we came in and we had the chair set up for Kate, she was just like, move this away. We need big, I want to perform this story for everybody watching. It's not just like in a story time, and a lot of our librarians who run story time, it's not just about reading the story, it's about engagement. And she was able to use this as her engagement tool, which was fantastic. As I said, the bigger filming area, it's not just the face, but also from the waist up with room to move. And also she really suggested about scanning the title and having a slower pause on pictures as well in between. So you'll notice if and when you watch our stories, it's a slower transition rate, and that's something that we've also moved over to our regular story time as well. We also spoke to Deaf Can Do and Kate specifically on the day about her being comfortable with a voiceover. So she didn't voice the stories, and Deb, who was the interpreter at the time, wasn't comfortable. So we made sure that she was comfortable with the voiceover. So I was lucky enough to be the voice, the English voice for Kate on that particular day. And that was something that we also sent to her beforehand. So Kate was able to coordinate that for us, that every time we edited something and put something onto the video, we were able to share that with Kate herself, and also that everybody at Deaf Can Do, to make sure that they were comfortable with the process and happy with the end product, which I think was really good. Just some extra information, if anybody is interested, we just use Camtasia for our editing software. It's very basic, so we do everything in-house. That's approximately $600 a year. We use SoundCloud for background music if you happen to need it, and we use the free ones. And we use rev.com for our subtitles. That does take a lot of time for our staff. We find that takes more time than the editing sometimes, and we just send off the final document the final document, and it's approximately $1.10 per minute, and it comes back within 24 hours, so it's a good time saver for us. What I learned out of this process mainly is to listen to the experts and be really open with concerns and barriers. We went back and forth about why we needed to pay for this, do this, how do we do this, what's the best location, the best lighting. We spoke about everything beforehand, and nothing was off limits, which was really, really good. And Deaf Can Do were really open and really supportive, speaking to us and working us through the whole process. My biggest thing is that specialised services are exactly that. They're special and they're worth the time, the budget and the energy in getting it right. It's not just a great outcome for our own organisations, it's a fantastic outcome for the community. And we've got some plans there to work further together, especially with the online grant that we were just able to receive to expand this any further. I've got the 3 Storytime links there. So when it's shared, Phoebe, you'll be able to send these ones out as well. And hopefully that's something that everybody can enjoy. We actually include these in our newsletter, which goes to about 40,000 individuals, which are the members at the City of Salisbury Libraries. And then we also send them out to all of the schools, childcare centres and kindergartens monthly. as well with all of our Storytime collection. So it's something that has been picked up really quite quickly and moved around a lot of the schools, which is great as a resource. That's just some of my contacts there. I'm happy for you to contact us, and if you do want to speak to Def Can Do, that information's there as well. I think that's pretty much it from me. Anything else, Kat and Cheryl? I can see you turn to the pictures. I think that's it. You're all good? No problems. Thank you so much, ladies.
Oh, Kathryn, that was fantastic. So thank you to Kathryn and Kat and Cheryl. That was also very, very enlightening. Now, we had a number of questions come through the chat, so I'm just going to hand to Phoebe for the first one that came through because you took a copy of it. Are you there?
Yes, I did. I'm just going to add some spotlights back onto people who might want to respond to these questions. 1 second. There was a question from Caroline Munchenberg, and this might be for Annette. And it was about links in the playlist in the City of Sydney's Auslan Storytime, and that some of them were hidden or unavailable. And so that was a question about, I guess, about availability and about licensing, and about whether they can be shared with library links or on social media.
Yes, the reason that on YouTube some of them are hidden are those publisher permissions have expired. So, like all libraries, we're probably juggling a mix of the ALIA license and the publisher by publisher licenses from the beginning of COVID. So, yeah, that's probably why they appear to be hidden. I'm just going to paste into the chat here. Yeah, I'll put it into the chat. The URLs for both the the YouTube channel that has all of the videos, but also I'll pop the our What's On site. So that's the YouTube channel I've just posted, and I'll just put the What's On URL in as well. Hopefully that's coming through, so people can just click on those to check out our story times. In terms of sharing them, I believe that the ALIA license allows us to promote them to other libraries, but we might just want to double check that with
So this is a possibility, but in the spirit of online storytime, what we're hoping is that because it's about community connection, building relationships, having people in local communities connected to their local libraries, that it won't become a few places doing Auslan Storytimes and everyone across Australia looking at those, but that everybody will be able to start creating their own and therefore connect to their local deaf community, their local deaf services, and build it up that way. But certainly in the meantime, there is nothing preventing people from sharing the existing wonderful Auslan online storytime videos that we have. I had a question, if I could ask everybody. This might be a bit of a silly question, because Auslan is a visual language. I was wondering if there have been any picture books or stories that are written, composed, designed for and in Auslan that are about Auslan or anything like that, or are they all translated?
Well, yeah, it isn't a written language. So how do you write Auslan? I mean, you could try to draw the sign, but it's very difficult to show the visual, the movement aspect, that part of the language. So, I mean, you're actually missing all that extra linguistic information by not having the movement, by not having the facial expression. So there are a number of elements. It's not just the hand shape. So it is very, very difficult to write the language. So that's why really it's a 3D performance, and that's really the best and only mode really that you can do it.
We've looked, and like Kate said, storybooks in Auslan. It's not, with the only books we have, children's books, picture books that we have in Auslan are books that are, you know, lists of signs, like Auslan Book of Colours or Auslan Book of Alphabet. It's actually just like Kate said, it's actually just a still image or a still illustration of a sign. It's not a storytelling vehicle. It's just a list of signs in books. That's as close as we could find.
Yeah. I had a question. There's a question from Jackie at ALIA, and it's an open question to all of the panelists. And Kate has offered a really nice answer. But the question is, would any of the panelists like to share their vision for the future of Auslan Storytimes? What are your next steps and dreams for programs and services moving forward?
I might contribute to that. So our ALIA grant was centred around the Ghana language and also Auslan, to make sure that we're able to expand on those a little bit further. We are really lucky with the City of Salisbury. We do have connections with a lot of Auslan interpreters that come into programs when needed, but our online sort of journey has only really just started with the early years stuff, and then it's more face-to-face and individually. With the COVID situation, we actually reduced numbers. Most of our library sort of services now and the programs are run in a hub model, so there's more space available with social distancing. So we're lucky in that way, even though numbers are down physically within the library areas, our program numbers are still quite steady. So that we'll probably be doing more face-to-face, and then continuing on this year with our online story time.
Well, I noticed that we do have another question in the chat. So thanks, Caitlin. A mother asked me, is there anything for my deaf child? And I want to meet that demand and provide inclusion for everyone in our story times. So that's a hard one if the actual library is not doing an Auslan online story time.
Well, I mean, Phoebe, if this is okay, at the moment, you could direct them to the Salisbury or City of Sydney videos. And we've found that they've been a really great support, especially, and even we've had some really amazing feedback from a parent who, through Genevieve's work at Deaf Society, that was learning Auslan along with her son, and it was a real breakthrough for them to be able to do this. It was a really fun activity, but they were making real progress in their language acquisition for Auslan.
Yeah, I can definitely share with Caitlin and everybody all of the links to the ones that have been produced by the City of Sydney and City of Salisbury, and also to note that there have been other library services who've done really great work in this space. One that comes to mind readily is Monash in Victoria, and they produce videos in a different model where they have a reader and an interpreter sitting side by side, and they must be able to coordinate it pretty well. Maybe the reader is also able to speak Auslan so that they can keep pace with each other. But that's just another place that's doing some Auslan work. And I know anecdotally, but I don't have a very good database of other public libraries who have been doing in-person Auslan story time. So it's not something that's always going on online, but is something that's happening locally.
There's some excellent answers in the chat as well, so please go through So Amy has said the author Kerry Taylor has a few Auslan books, and someone else has also mentioned that Storybox does as well. I want to go to Sophie's question now. Overall, what do you think is a good first step for a library looking to introduce more inclusive storytime sessions similar to what you have mentioned today? So, for example, Annette, how did you introduce it? How did you convince your library manager?
I actually read that question a bit differently. I read it as, how do you start creating these things? And my first my instinct was, I mean, Vicki, from the perspective that you're looking at it, I'm really fortunate. City of Sydney is very supportive of inclusion and does a lot of work in the inclusion space. So I guess the challenge was making, I guess, a little bit of convincing that we wanted to make it inclusive, but we wanted, I guess there was a little bit of a conversation at the start about making sure it's an inclusive story time for a mixed audience. And I think we've found a good balance for that now. And then that satisfies most people's concerns, I think. But what my first instinct to reply to that question was that how we've learned the importance of centering the community that the story times are for in the design of your program. That you really, we might have the resources and the spaces and the platforms, but you really need to consult with the community who will be benefiting from that in your design of the program. And we really learnt so much from Kate's feedback and all her advice through the evolution of our program. And I think we're in a really good place now because of that.
Thank you. Anything that you'd like to add to that, Kathryn?
We actually didn't find it to be too much of a challenge to getting it started and having the support from management or exec. And I think that's because when we first started talking about it, we linked it straight away to strategies that they were already had approved and was supporting. It was just how we actually implemented what they were asking for. So once we started speaking with our peak body and the community to find out how we actually deliver that, there wasn't any questions at all. And I think it's a flexible and it's a fluid conversation. So it's not just we can't just assume that we've all got it all right. It just has to be open communication throughout the whole time and moving forward as well. We know now that there may be other things that we may change, or the community needs may change as well. So we need to be flexible in that approach. So I think talking to as many different people as you can to getting it right for the community is probably the best step to start with. Yeah, I think that would probably be my advice.
Well, thanks, Kathryn. I just want to highlight Sabine's question, what are the options for librarians to learn Auslan themselves? And thank you, Kate, for answering that question. But I also want to just put something out there. I have paid for any staff members within my library team that have wanted to learn Auslan. And then when they've achieved their qualification, I pay them an allowance, like a first aid allowance, because I do feel that that's a skill we've paid them for and that they're now using within the library environment. And I do feel that it's that important.
I could add to that too, that we encourage our coordinators to, when we write, as we all do work for, public, local government and public service, you have your annual work and development performance review and plan. I really do encourage our coordinators to have, if they would like to include some training in maybe an online course or something like that they can fit into their workload and still upskill a bit and have that little bit more insight into Auslan. And if it's something that's recognised by their organisation as a priority, it will get done.
Suzanne has asked a very good question. How do you discover if there is a need in your community?
Well, for me, I think it's just how we usually evaluate our community regularly anyway, so using profile ID or speaking to your peak bodies within the community, and hearing about community feedback as well, and constant evaluation. That's probably the biggest thing for us is doing the research through the regular means of evaluation, and treat it like it's a need or a gap. If it becomes a need or a gap, it will show within your evaluations as well.
Genevieve, who's in the audience, has also been has posted a really important point too about the training thing. That deaf awareness training, we've run that for quite a few times. I think about 60 people in our organisation have now had deaf awareness training, so that if there are any staff members supporting face-to-face programs and also online programs, they have that insight to be able to do that well. And that can be done in groups. Jen or Kate, you might know, that can be done in groups of up to 10 or 20 staff at a time, I think. Is that right? Hi, Genevieve. You're on mute.
Still on.
Sorry, I thought I'd just jump in here, because, and Kate can add to this if she needs to, but I've used deaf awareness training in lots of different workplaces, but particularly when I was doing a project that was about engaging emergency services. And I've had deaf awareness training delivered to groups of up to like 100 people. That, that's not ideal. Small groups are good, but they'll do it. You can tailor it. And our deaf awareness trainers will tailor it. Like, they've got a general awareness, but they'll tailor it to that workplace or to that what the needs are. So if you engage beforehand and tell them the type of things that will need to, or what's the usual scenarios, then they'll tailor it to your workforce. And it is a brilliant way to start. It's even before leaping in. I mean, absolutely leap in and do Auslan, absolutely. But even before that, if you have people that have no idea, that's the place to start. I think it's really good. Yeah.
Thanks, Genevieve. And I noticed that there's some other really good ideas that have happened in the chat as well. Look, I want to thank you all for your questions. I'm going to hand over to Phoebe to actually wrap up our session. That's our 1 hour gone. Thanks, Phoebe.
That's all right. I would like to thank all of our wonderful presenters who've joined us today. We've had Annette and Kathryn and Kat and Cheryl and Genevieve and Della and Kerry for interpreting, and also Vicki for chairing and for hosting, and to everybody who's been able to attend today and been part of this effort to increase and improve Auslan Storytime sessions and deaf services in general through public libraries. Hearing about these processes and journeys has been extremely inspiring and motivating, and so I suppose now it's over to the public libraries to put this learning and practical ideas into action. And I know many people have applied for through the community grants for money to support this kind of thing. So I think we should be seeing some really great Auslan Storytimes coming out this year. I'll be sending out the link pretty soon, and if you have any questions or comments or would like to be in touch with me or with any of the panelists, do get in touch at storytime@alia.org.au, and until the next time, enjoy the rest of your day.